You're listening to Power Athlete Radio, a podcast dedicated to empowering your performance every damn day. Join former NFL pro and Power Athlete founder John Welborn as he dissects the greatest minds in strength, conditioning, and more. So whether your goal is to be the hammer, destroy mediocrity, or simply move the dirt, you've come to the right place. Now with the warm-up done, let the gains begin.
Yesterday I was out at Froning's place. So I went out there to do his Meat Eater podcast. And it was kind of interesting because one, I'd never met him, which is crazy because like at the time we were kind of involved with CrossFit. I just never, our paths never crossed. And what's wild is he interned as an assistant strength coach at Tennessee, Cookeville, and Chip Pugh, who was the head coach, followed CrossFit Football. And that was where we actually did our very first commercial one. And that was one where Glassman and all them showed up like all in their own black black Escalades. And then they showed up, they came in, Glassman heard me bomb the initial talk and then went, laughed, and they all walked out. And then we never heard from them again. So, but it was pretty interesting that he's like, oh yeah, no, I was really familiar with the program. We had done it a bunch, and like not only a very gracious host, but like a legit cool cat. I was like, man, nice. I'm sad that we haven't been friends all these years. And Rory's working for him now. Rory's his CEO. I don't know if you remember Rory.
Yep.
And Rory's a great dude. So it was a lot of fun to go out there. Went to his place. He's got a podcast studio in his gym. And we trained a little bit. And I just got to cut it up. But it was interesting talking with those guys. They're good for about a 45 minute to an hour podcast, which I was like, all day will I do those podcasts. And I was joking that I was on Dave Tate's Table Talk. I went out there to go do his Table Talk when I was going to go see Jared Allen's induction into the Hall of Fame. So I figure, somewhere in the neighborhood of like an hour and a half, hour and 45, all of a sudden the spider sense starts tingling when it's like, okay, time to wrap this thing up. He blew past that at like 4 hours later. I was like, dude, if I'd known we were going to talk for 4 hours, I would have eaten breakfast. I'm like over here like gnawing on my hand, like looking around for a protein bar. But yeah, that was, and the crazy part is the longer we talked, the more excited he got. And I'm like, this dude would this is crazy. I hadn't done a 4 hour podcast, ever, but to have somebody who was that excited to talk to me for 4 hours was a little disconcerting.
That's kind of awesome.
Yeah. Well,
he must have had some sort of slow acting cocaine or something. Like it just started ramping up through the course of the show.
Well, we've done so many of these. I can pretty much give you my life story and get everything done in 30 minutes and wrap it up with a nice bow. And the fact that it went as long as we did, I felt like I was either not giving him the information or he was just really excited to talk. And I was like, man, you're either really lonely or this is just what you do.
Or you do good conversation, John.
I
sell yourself short.
It's because I'm a tremendous slouch. No, it was good, and it was funny as I was going into Froning's deal. Like I didn't even know necessarily. I sat down. I'm like, what are we going to talk about? And they actually had done a little bit of research, and they hit me with stuff. And I'm like, dude, I've done so many of these. Just give me an easy layup, give me a softball, and I'll just crush it out, dude. As you know, and you have done many, many times. It's the rare ones where you're like, this is an interesting approach. But, most people want to talk to us about strength conditioning or nutrition or, what it's like to be a father. And you're like, oh, yeah, no, I've thought about this stuff ad nauseum. And I'm more than happy to run down. But I thought that maybe we could do a little bit of history, go back in time. And, I was talking to, because hopefully I'm not, telling anything, but, CrossFit was up for sale. And I think some people were trying to figure out how to necessarily negotiate that. And I think they wanted Rich to be a part of it and his team. And, he's really, runs a super successful business and has created this Mayhem Nation and all. Everything he's done is just really, really good because, he's a good person and he does good stuff. And he's not a Martian. He's not a crazy person. He's not a lizard person. Like Gigi. And, so I think they were trying to kind of incorporate him into this whole thing. And as we were kind of getting into it a little bit, he didn't know, Rory knows the history, but he didn't know a lot of the history or kind of what had been down because he was on just one side with the athlete side. So to kind of, he was kind of asking, a few questions of us because, you were obviously much earlier than me, but, every step of the way in my indoctrination into CrossFit. You were there. I remember leaving Glassman's house and me calling you and being like, Rob, let me run this up. Like, let me explain to you what he just said. And you were like, really? No, he said that, and I was like, man, I'm in disbelief too. And it turned out to be the bigger rope-a-dope. At 19, he stepped into one of the most demanding training programs on earth and came out a Navy SEAL. Years later, armed with a medical degree, he returned to the teams, this time as their physician on the West Coast. That's where everything changed. Doug Parsley began seeing the same pattern again and again, a gap between healthcare and true health. While the system chased symptoms, he focused on the foundation, building health from the inside. No shortcuts, no band-aids, just helping the body do what it was designed to do. When he helped the SEAL brothers get off of drugs like Ambien, they started asking for something better. That something better became Sleep Remedy, a natural formula that helps restore your brain's own sleep process. His philosophy is simple. 80% of health comes down to just 4 pillars: sleep, nutrition, movement, and stress control, with sleep being the foundation. Today, Doc works with Tier 1 operators, pro athletes, entrepreneurs, and parents, helping them perform, recover, and live a full life. This might be the conversation that changes how you think about sleep, performance, and life itself. To learn more, try Sleep Remedy. Visit docparsley.com.
Yeah, I mean, what I've discovered over time is frequently narcissists really believe what they believe in the moment. And then a little bit of time goes by, they get a little bit of self-reflection, and they start whatever it is that like terrorizes them in the wee hours of the night. Then they start second guessing, some of the magnanimous thoughts that they have and the camaraderie, and they're like, people really don't love me, everybody's out to get me, mm-hmm. and they just nuke this stuff. And so I think in that moment he was really believing that stuff, and then he went away and instead of wholesale bringing you in as talent, maybe a couple of points of equity to buy some fealty and also to buy some talent. It just becomes this zero-sum game, which is the kind of the long story of CrossFit. If you were to describe it in like a sentence, it was a zero-sum game that went great until it didn't. Yeah.
I told them the story of us sitting at that, the Four Seasons True North, when we went up there for that big meeting. And you remember we're all sitting on one side of the table and they're on the other. And I think it was me that said, this would be a lot easier if you just purchased all of us and just bought all the businesses and brought us on your side of the table. And then we started, you basically brought us in. I mean, like Facebook, they allowed people to start, creating technology in their ecosystem. And if it proved to be valuable and good, they just basically purchased it and said, great, now you work for me. And I was like, all this stuff about, preying on the brand and eroding the brand and this and all these little petty things that they were so upset about. I'm like, all this goes away if you just buy us. And I remember Starrett was like 100%. And you were like, yeah, this would just be way easier. And you would have thought that I had dropped an N-bomb in a room in like a black church or something. I mean, remember the look on his face? It's as if they had never thought about it. And it never would have crossed their minds that they would have literally dispelled all of the problems they had with the SMEs if they just wrote a check. And they had more than enough money to. They could have easily written us a check and been like, I'll give you guys each $1 million for your businesses. And we all probably would have sold and gone to work for them. And then we would have been like shoulder to shoulder doing exactly what they wanted. But and then you remember that whole thing, like Dave got all super cunty about it. And I remember Nicole and them, and it was as if they had never even crossed their mind and they never even thought about us as anybody that potentially would be like, hey, these businesses are pretty good. These guys are putting out great content. They add value. They give me authenticity. I mean, all these other things. These are my soldiers. They've done good. Let's bring them in-house. Let's put them on our side and get them to be our soldiers. And remember then that the whole thing just kind of ended, and then we went out to the pool, and that was the end of CrossFit after that.
Well, and the pool was interesting too. Greg was with a woman who, and then one of the wait staff walked up and said, "Where's your wife?" And he pointed to a blonde person, and she said, "No, the other wife."
The dark-haired one.
Also, the dark-haired one.
Yeah.
which was fucking great. And I remember John pivoted, which you have amazing movement for as voluminous as you are. You pivoted, you drinks, please.
Well, it was uncomfortable, and all of a sudden,
super uncomfortable.
We're in the pool, and that blonde lady, I saw a tear go down her face. And while I was never a big fan of hers, I do have a certain intrinsic barometer for seeing
humanic empathy.
Yeah, and realizing that woman had been a victim in this weird fucking twisted game, and now here she is outed in front of the entire back end, business, and basically made it look like a fool. And then even when we went to dinner and we all sat down at that one side and he was at the other, and Gigi went face down in the salad and they carried him out. And at that point we just were like, let's get weird, and just started ordering $1,000 bottles of wine.
Yep. It's is the check still open? Okay, we'll take whatever that thing is at the top of the list.
God, I remember they brought over the reserve list, and I'm like, we're gonna need this abacus, we're gonna need this, and this, and oh man, we had $6,000 worth of wine. That was man. One, they never did that again, and two, that was kind of I realized at that moment when when we suggested that this purchase thing and the look, I was like, oh man, there's no finality in this thing that doesn't look like this thing crashing and burning. There's no business acumen on this side. There's no, like you said, zero sum. I realized at that moment that there was no kind of there was no happy ending in this thing. And it was just going to end in blood and mess and a bunch of bad stuff for CrossFit and for us as well, being involved with it, for the fact that it seems so basic to me. I'm like, yeah, just buy everybody in here. Just write everybody a check, even if it stings a little bit, even if you don't have the cash, you got to go borrow it. Now, all of a sudden, all the money that we're generating is yours, and you just pay us a salary, and you basically just big bank, little bank us. And you guys know what we're making. And the fact that that never even crossed their minds just made me realize.
I think it this goes back though, if folks want to understand the black box, you really, I think, need to go back far earlier than that. And in the beginning, Greg was incredibly generous, at least towards me. But I remember there was this tendency, there would always be a new shiny object that would kind of come in, and that person was the person. And for a while, that was me. And I would notice that the minions that were every day around him were just treated incredibly poorly. And, again, in kind of the classic, narcissist, psychological abuse kind of stuff. But he was super generous to me in the beginning. But I was also, there's a quote out there floating around somewhere that CrossFit may not have ever done what it did had I not showed up when I did, because I was kind of this buffer. I came from a codependent family, and those well-refined skills of dealing with codependency, I kind of allowed Greg's genius to kind of come through and really kind of tamp down some of the pricklier, more difficult elements with them. And it's a super long back and forth story, but I remember Greg and Chris Summer were going back and forth. And these are two very smart guys. These are, I hold you up there. These are some of the smarter people that I have in my life and that I've met, but they were going back and forth. And Chris Summer at that time, his star was really on the rise. He was doing some great work in trying to take some gymnastics elements and making it more accessible to athletes and older people and all this stuff. And it's a big hill to climb, because gymnastics is just this infinite pool of talent development, so getting old, inflexible, weak people to do any of it is kind of a big lift. But they were going back and forth, and it's escalating. And I pinged Greg and I'm like, hey, why don't we just offer an olive branch to Coach Summer? He's a great asset. And again, the same thing. Why don't we bring him in? And even if you guys have some differing views on stuff, that's okay. We're stronger as an organization if you have some some differing views. He's like, oh, Robbie, yeah, you're so right. I'll absolutely do that. So then I pinged Coach Summer, and I'm like, hey, I think you should get a reach out from Greg, and it should be favorable and everything. And maybe an hour goes by, and then Coach Summer pings me this screenshot, and he was like, I don't know if this is favorable. And it was basically like, Chris, and I've got the email somewhere, but Chris, you're just a pawn in a much bigger game of which Robb and Greg Everett being the Greg there, are minor but important players. Don't bother it, and on and on and on. Don't bother responding. You're filtered for trash. It's Miller time. And I was like, holy fuck, man. So, I had this what I thought was a pretty meaningful heart-to-heart with Gigi, and trying to like keep what I thought were the important pieces of this thing together. And, he just had this like awful response. I don't even know how to characterize it, but, it was in part pissing down Chris's back, but then also telling me, well, kid, you can go fuck yourself because I'm not going to take any advice from you. And so, we decided to de-affiliate at that point because I just couldn't abide treatment of people like that. And so ironically, it was September 11th, like 2006 or something that we sent in our de-affiliation letter. And again, like all narcissists, when he reached out to me, he's like, Robbie, it's a misunderstanding. We can work through this. We're all good. And I'm like, no, we're not. And I'm doing this because you're going to destroy CrossFit doing this. Mm-hmm. And I really, in my soul, thought that was true. And it's probably naive, and it probably sounds stupid at this point, but I really loved that whole community, and I loved the concept. Yeah. Like I had in my head pictures of like, we would take over medicine, and there would be doctors associated with all these gyms, and we could flip this broken healthcare system on its head. It's like he built a multi-billion-dollar fitness company. That was a rounding error of what could have been built out of taking over healthcare, which we were absolutely in a position to do.
Dude, when I met you at the CrossFit Games and we started talking a little bit, and even on that drive back from Arizona, you explained to me this, and I feel like he either didn't have the business acumen, didn't have the ability to let it go, or couldn't bring the right people around him because he was either, mentally ill or sick or whatever it is. Like he just couldn't bring the right people in. Like if he had just kind of subsided into this founder and actually brought in legitimate people, more so than trying to run it like a biker gang, which is what he told me. I run everything like a biker gang. And I was like, oddly enough, I used to ride with the pagans, and you're not a fucking biker. So his analogy like kind of fell on deaf ears when he realized that the only way he knew anything about biker gangs was obviously Dave Castro and his family used to do some work with the Hells Angels, which is interesting because Joe Capuccio knew all about that. And so he had, I think, had heard some stories about the HA and some of their dealings, and so he of course latched on that we're going to run this thing like a biker gang. And I was like, what a fucking idiot. And just the amount of things, but I'll tell you, extremely charismatic, had good vision, understood it. But like, I think he just couldn't get out of his own way. And the people that were the really good ones he brought in, instead of bringing people in, putting them in positions of power and getting them to go in the right direction, he just would drive those people out. It was almost like if you were good, and I think he even told me that the barometer of whether or not you're doing a good job and whether or not you're impacting and doing everything that you do is if Greg hates you and drives you out.
Right.
And so he was like, and you were like, you'll know that you're on the right track and doing something good if that happens. And sure enough, it did.
Yeah. The gal, I forget her first name, last name's Kaplan, but she's doing his Broken Science Initiative gig now. And I had a couple of pretty long conversations with her, and I was just kind of trying to get her take. I'm like, how did Greg surround himself with so much incompetence? And she was actually fairly transparent about it, and she said these are people that were not that talented and were never going to have an opportunity to do something with like the payday that they're getting now, and so it bought absolute and complete loyalty is really what it boiled down to, which I guess I kind of get. But you end up it's a constant danger for someone who's in a position of power and experiencing success to not get surrounded by yes men just just because. But then when you actively do the bonsai tree trimming in such a way that is the only thing you're left with, it just, as a long arc, it amazed me that, and it shows how resilient and how sticky CrossFit is and was, that it lasted as long as it did. And that he was able to just like pressure test it at every turn. I don't think anybody in the world was more surprised by the success of CrossFit than Greg. And he constantly, I think, was waiting for the other shoe to drop and for it all to crater. And so he would just do these things kind of like preemptively trying to bring the sandhill down. It's like it keeps growing and it's like, well, we're going to have an avalanche at some point. I'll do something. It's almost like trying to preemptively like nuke the economy so it can get back to a restart. And I was just, the only thing that I got wrong is I couldn't predict how long the thing could go on due to the goodwill and the good work that CrossFit actually did. Like these gyms changed lives and really improved folks' lives. It provided this third place for people to exist in. People weren't doing churches and things like the Elks Club and stuff like that in the mid 2000s, 2010s. Like attendance in those things had just fallen off a cliff. So people really needed something else to do. And CrossFit was that thing to do.
Man, no, it, when I came to it, obviously I was much later adopter than you, but still very, very early in it. The one thing that was amazing to me was the community. One, I was just amazed that people wanted to know this stuff. And I think I even expressed that to you. I'm like, I can't believe normal people want to know about this training stuff. And you were like, dude, they really want to know. Because I'd lived in this ivory tower, this bubble as a professional athlete. And it wasn't until I went to the CrossFit Games and saw, not only the fervor, but like how into it people were. I was like, man, this has potential to be really big. But, I think at that time I was still a little bit more, not romanced, but like, Greg, he's a smart dude, uses a lot of big words, and he's an eloquent speaker. And it wasn't until I got into this like interesting relationship where now I was kind of working to build my own thing within their shadow. Did you realize that, insecurity, dislike, jealousy, I mean, all these weird factors that just played into it, which felt so weird for me. I'm like, why would you bring people into your house that you were, either untrusting of? I mean, it was a very, very weird situation.
Well, again, he had an eye for identifying talent, but then talent just implicitly suggests that the folks might be better at something than he is. And that would be okay for a time, and then it would just eat at him, and then he would start undermining that person's credibility and trying to find alternatives and try to find somebody as good as, but, more controllable. And it just doesn't work that well. Like we've seen that, like finding a good employee is a tightrope act in that you want the person to be really self-motivated, but the people who are super self-motivated just need to go do their own gig.
Yeah.
And what he found were people who were talented and self-motivated. And he could have, though, if he made the pot sweet enough, could have kept us around,
sure.
And could have bought some loyalty, I think, to a greater degree, but still like the dysfunction, the way that people were treated and everything would just becomes untenable at some point. At least it did for me. I was I think an earlier than most person. I think that was something he didn't really understand. I got a degree in chemistry from a state school, and I had like no huge aspirations about what my life was going to be. I came from a very poor family. So if I was able to one day own a house and not be on parole and stuff like that, like I did good. Like my aspirations were pretty, modest. And he just couldn't believe that I would be willing to walk away from this largesse out of some principle. Like he just couldn't believe it, because 90% of the people in his immediate circle, they would absolutely stab each other in the back to maintain their position.
Well, I mean, in a way, those principles have guided us very well. I mean, and the reason that we're still friends all these years later, I mean, was because, when the devil comes and offers you those 30 pieces of silver, you got to make a decision. Do you do what's right, or do you stand with your friends? And I will always stand with my friends and do what's right, for the mere fact that, like, just because you're on this side today, one, you're going to be on the side tomorrow. And why do you want to link your wagons with people like that? So
right.
I mean, that was kind of a no brainer in a lot of ways, but what's so funny you saying that, I mean, you think about the influence you've had not only within CrossFit, but within the nutrition space. I mean, obviously, Lauren Cordain kind of put the paleo stuff out there, but I mean, it really was you as the engine behind it that drove it to the heights that it was. And then the problem is that, and I always joke, like the paleo thing was the thing that made the most sense to me. I mean, I remember Mauro De Pasquale talking about, Vince Gironda's Stone Age diet, and this is the way to eat. And then when I met you, and then the problem is it went from like an intelligent view of nutrition to absolute ridiculousness, where now people are selling these like honey-based, 1,000-calorie, 500 grams of carbohydrate treats while the dude's wearing a loincloth, and it just took on this weird role of like these like weird outliers where I was like, God, they almost added like a ridiculousness to it, where now it became something they made fun of on South Park. And I felt like, and I think you did a great job of keeping in the science, and Matt Lalonde did as well, like, hey, there has to be science driving this or it's just going to turn into a punchline. And that was Matt's talk, remember, at AHS, that if we keep this in science, this has a chance to go somewhere. If we let it get, wrangled by a bunch of like charlatans, it's just going to be a joke. And I remember they were all upset and butthurt at him, but it ended up getting wrangled by a bunch of charlatans and became kind of a punchline.
Yeah. A footnote in history instead of a world-changing concept. Yeah.
Which, I mean, if you think about, those basic, principles that, I was very fortunate, I think, to go to your last nutrition one up in Reno we flew up to. It made a ton of sense. And the way you couched it and the science attributed to it just made a lot of sense. I mean, it's still how I eat 90%. I think the only addition that we've added is like sourdough bread, because to try to get more lactobacillus, but we eat a ton of fermented foods. But I mean, I think that's the only change. I still buy, the Japanese sweet potatoes that we ate at your house on New Year's that one time. I mean, I buy those every week. I cook those and I kind of mix and I'll do a little bit of rice. But for the most part, it's, other than some rice and a little bit of sourdough, it's still entirely paleo within that diet.
Right.
And it's just because it fits.
It's a great, and if nothing else, if somebody's trying to right the ship and change what they're doing, it's a damn good first place to start. Like if you're playing a game of darts, like it gets you 80% to the bullseye, removes most of the hyperpalatable foods. It tends to remove any of the immunogenic foods, so like gluten and even for a time dairy. It's kind of like, just pull that out for 30 days and then reintroduce it and see how you do with that stuff. And, I still every once in a while, I'll just, because I've had the same email for decades now, literally I'll search endometriosis or fibromyalgia or something, just kind of see how many emails have I gotten with that stuff in there. And endometriosis the other day, I had an email about it. I'm like, man, I haven't had an endometriosis question in ages. Like these things seem to go in cycles. And so I pulled it up and it was like 1,500 emails, with that inbound that had that as a tagline. And most of them were, hey, I tinkered with your stuff and my endometriosis largely resolved. And so it's, again, it's a very powerful tool. There's lots of ways to do it, but people do well with heuristics, just kind of simple rules that you can get in and plug in. The problem is when heuristics become religion, and then it's kind of like, well, are cashews really paleo because they come from a plant that, it's a dicotyledon, and you're like, oh my God. Like
dude,
we've so lost the thread, man.
People got into this weird like lane splitting, and it felt like overwhelming. We had a similar deal where one of the ladies that trained at our gym when we were, in my loft, my next door neighbor, she had been, her and her husband trying to have kids for 20 years. They'd been married for 20 years. I think she was 43. No, I think she was like 40. She got married when they were 20. He was 25, so he was 45 and she was 40. Been trying to have kids, had PCOS, and was never able to ever, could get pregnant, couldn't get the egg to stick. I mean, went through this and just basically will never be able to have kids. I go to your seminar, I come back, I talk to her about this, and she starts eating a paleo diet, and within 3 months she was pregnant with twins.
Yeah. We warned clients. We warned them. We're like, you will get pregnant in this gym. Not from me, but from somebody.
Well, and her husband, who was basically getting ready to retire from his job, hey, we're going to retire, sell everything. We're going to travel the world. Like, this is it. And then all of a sudden he's a father, turned into an alcoholic mess because he hadn't prepared for this. And they end up like getting a divorce and just basically cratered the poor dude. And so I was always like, well, yeah, that seminar was really good because she had kids. Yeah. And then her husband turned into a drunken and just like, I remember he was like, what? And it was like, ooh, this is, sorry. And he like came down and banged on the door. I don't know what you did. And I'm like, I didn't do anything. I just gave her some nutrition advice that I'd heard from this guy. And that was the end of it. But I do wonder, was it because it was so hot and had such fire behind it because it was producing such amazing results that the charlatans just kind of latched onto it because it was a easy thing to kind of get into, and like everybody kind of latched into it, and like all of a sudden I'm like, I think we were at the AHS that one year and it's like dudes are walking around in loincloths and I was like, what is going on? This is getting weird.
That was a lot. That was a lot. I mean, I do appreciate that the development of paleo foods may have been an off ramp where things started going sideways, but it's also you and I we tried like the paleo branch, like the meals delivered and the jerky and all that stuff, and we were just too early. Like that was a great fucking idea, great product.
Just way too early to market.
Literally a decade too early. And we coached a lot of people, and the consistent feedback is like, oh, it's hard, I don't know what to do, I need some options. And so I'm hesitant to call these folks, like the guys wearing loincloths, I guess, okay, maybe they're charlatans, but like the food developers, and maybe this is just me being a shill for consumer product goods now that I stick salt in the packet, and you're okay with that. But
you're a shill for big for big corporations now. You're working for big salt.
Even though we from day one have had a free how to make your own homebrew guide and still get like 500,000 downloads of that a month, but it's like whatever. But it's I think people look around and try to find ways to make things easier for folks, and maybe the element thing is kind of a good example of that. We had the homebrew guide up for a good 6 months. We had a shitload of downloads with it, and we were totally unsophisticated. We weren't using it as a lead magnet or anything, just my buddies over at Keto Gains. Like we had it on their site, we had it on robbwolf.com, and we had a ton of downloads. And then people started thanking us, or like, oh man, I feel so much better. Like addressing the electrolytes was a big deal, but when I travel, the 3 bags of white powder are kind of a problem for TSA. Have you guys ever thought about like a scooper thing or a stick pack or something? And it was like 6 months of people kind of humping our knee to do it, that I'm like, do you really think somebody would buy this stuff? And we gave it a shot, and apparently, a lot
Next
of
thing you know, it was all history.
And the only, it's funny, some of these other brands are like, our salt is from the Himalayas and this and that and all this magic. And we're like, it tastes good and it's convenient.
Yeah.
Like, that's it. And here's this free one if you don't like, because we have stevia or something in it. Like, here's this thing. But I think whenever you can find a pain point, and a lot of pain points in our modern world around nutrition is just kind of like simplicity and ease, and still finding something that tastes good. And if it does tick the box of whatever, like kind of dietary neuroses you have, whether it's gluten-free or whatever. So I do think that there was at least some honest effort at like trying to do things better. But even in Cordain's book, which came out in 2001, I mean, there was fuck all for like.
Well, wasn't he anti-salt?
Yeah. But as a tangential thing, he warned in the original paleo diet. He's like, hey, if you take a bunch of roasted almonds and cover them in honey and put some other stuff with it. I'm paraphrasing, but he was basically warning against taking paleo foods and making them into a hyper palatable delivery system.
Sure.
And he warned about that. in 2001, like I would say, was quite prescient around that, where it's like, yeah, this paleo stuff is great, but you can fuck this up. You can make, like a chocolate covered almond something that technically is paleo, and you could eat 2,000 calories of it in a sitting.
Well, the original thing too, and I remember this didn't come from you, and I think it came from Kimberly Monday. But do you remember we saw on the page that the paleo diet, you can eat as much as you want. And like, do you remember that was kind of like, people are like, you'll just naturally be full, and these foods are extremely satiating, and you can kind of eat like it'll somehow rewire your brain so you won't overeat. And I remember, I forgot where we were, but we ran into some big paleo people, and the one guy was super fat, and I was like, Rob, I'm like, how can that guy be that fat eating this paleo diet? And he's like, because they eat like starved hogs. And to this day, I still fucking use that line where I'm like, tell people and be like, hey, if you need to lose some pounds, I don't care what the food is, you cannot eat like a starved hog, to quote Robb Wolf. But I just remember you turned to me and you're like, because they eat like starved hogs. And sure enough, it's true.
I've seen you laugh before, but that one was like maybe a good 5 to 6 minutes, just dude, like almost epileptic seizure.
And I've been laughing about it for a decade and a half. It's still as funny right now, me saying it, as when you did it, because you didn't miss a beat. Your timing is some of the best I've ever been around. And like, dude, you just turned to me and we're like, and it was almost as good as when I was doing my presentation. Remember, we were sitting with Cordain at that event. And, basically it was paleo with the use of intelligent dairy as a weight gain to put on muscle and as a driver, which, and the thing that, remember Cordain like turned to me and he wanted to fight me. He was like going to like fight me on this because he'd written a whole book about dairy. But if you look at a lot of the hunter-gatherer tribes, like the Maasai and other ones, that they have high amounts of dairy in their diets. And like, this was an element, and like the fermentation process and everything they went through. And I'm like, dude, we can use this. And I ended up testing on some people, and it worked well for a specific audience. And, but God, that starved hogs is still funny, dude. That's a good one. But yeah, I mean, that was the problem, that like, cause he was real anti-salt. And I remember, was it you that showed me that picture? Was it like the salt hill? There was like a huge pillar of salt. And he was like, oh, all these people ate low salt diets. And I think you showed a picture of like a huge salt deal. And you're like, they wouldn't have a pyramid of salt sitting there if they weren't consuming it in large amounts.
Yeah. And I think Lauren,
is he still alive?
Lauren's still alive. It's very unfortunate. He and I had a pretty good falling out over a decade ago. And he has some sort of frontal lobe dementia. And I think some of the falling out that he had with people, like you get a lot of hostility from people. I don't do very well with mentors. That's why I'm grateful you're my friend. So it's like, although you've been my mentor too, but like Greg and Lauren were probably the two key people in my life in those regards. And Lauren developed this frontal lobe dementia, but he really had some brilliant insights. Like, he was kind of Johnny on the spot, but the problem with Lauren is that he would take a hypothesis and he ceased doing good science with it. And I think in part because, man, he again, maybe a little bit similar to Greg, he was right about so much shit. Like, there was an Australian physician that had tied together gut permeability and autoimmunity in the 1960s. And he had predicted the presence of what we now recognize as being zonulin, this molecule that keeps the tight junctions in the gut intact. He predicted this 40 years ahead of its discovery. It was kind of like, Stephen Hawking predicting, we should have a particle of this mass and this energy at this spot, and we just haven't found it yet. Like, it was really prescient. And in Australia, this doctor had some clinics, and they were starting to do basically like these paleo-esque gluten-free diets for autoimmune disease. And then if I have the story correct, I think the guy died in a car accident or something, and the clinic shut down, and his work just went into, the dustbin, like it was lost. And Lauren found it, and he was able, that was just like this linchpin part of thinking about this overall diseases of Western civilization, that you had the hyperinsulinemic part, and then you had this autoimmune gut dysregulation part. And he was so fucking early on that. And Nikki's mom died at age 50 from rheumatoid arthritis complications. My mom died ultimately from rheumatoid arthritis and type 2 diabetes complications. And again, like if I poke around in my inbox, thousands of people that have put different types of autoimmune conditions into remission from just this basic kind of paleo intervention, and it fucking saved their lives. And I think that it was so powerful that Lauren then ceased to check his own assumptions. And so like the sodium piece was one of these examples. He constructed this argument that ancestral diets were quite low in sodium. And I think that may broadly be the case, but there's some interesting places where you get a lot more sodium. Like if you kill an animal and don't bleed it, it like doubles the amount of sodium that you're going to get in the meat, and some different things like that. And there's still trade and different things. And also as active as these hunter-gatherers were, they're not professional athletes or even just like athletes to my old sarcopenic level where I do jujitsu 3 days a week, my zone 2 cardio, 3 days of lifting. That's way more physical activity and by and large, way more sweating generally than what our hunter-gatherer ancestors would have done. Like there's some great studies even of the Hadza and the Kung Sun where they may have a barn burner of a day and then they may not be super active for another week. Yeah. And they rest and recover and they eat. And so you don't need to be back in the fight the next day. But like if you're police or firefighter or roofer or one of these poor people in Florida building roads and stuff, and you're on 140 degree asphalt, like a low sodium diet will fucking kill you. Like it will absolutely crush you. And the other thing too is that when people eat a minimally processed whole food diet, most of the sodium is removed and their glycemic index typically reduces. Even if you're doing like rice and sweet potatoes and stuff, typically your overall glycemic load reduces. And so your insulin reduces. And so your ability to retain sodium reduces. And a hat tip back to Greg Glassman. God, this had to have been like 2005. I remember chatting with him and he got onto the sodium topic. And he's like, Robbie, if these guys really doing this kind of paleo zone thing, if they don't get at least 5 grams of sodium a day, they absolutely explode. And it's kind of hard to get them to do it. Like because people tend to avoid salt. And then when you eat this kind of paleo zone diet, there's not much salt there. And so they had to figure out these kind of crafty ways of doing that. And I remember kind of banking that, and I would vigorously salt my food and everything, but I never went back and really, I never got quantified about what I was doing. And I was woefully under consuming salt for a long time.
I think we all were.
Led into some problems. Yeah.
I think we all were.
That was something that Lauren never, it's like, okay, let's say our hunter-gatherer ancestors didn't consume a lot of sodium. Okay, let's just assume that that's the case. How does that apply to a modern athlete? How does that apply to a firefighter or a dude that's deployed in the Middle East and wearing, 80 pounds of kit running up a hill? It doesn't apply at all. And it's kind of funny because Lauren's background was exercise physiology. Yeah. And so he had a number of things like saturated fat, sodium, where it's kind of like, okay, there were probably these upper and lower bounds that are probably typical of an ancestral diet. And that's an interesting observation. But now in the clinical application, what does that mean for us now? And, if you're sedentary, desk-bound, maybe a little insulin resistant, then yeah, you probably don't need to add any sodium to the diet. And you might be smart, keeping an eye on the amount that you consume. But if you're at all athletic, if you live in a hot, humid environment, if you live at altitude, all of that goes out the window. And that was something that Lauren was just, and similar again to like when he was wanting to go to blows with you over the dairy. You're up there describing this thing where like this basic paleo template is phenomenal for like an up and coming athlete, but if you could get Lauren was really freaked out about like the IGF-1 and some of these other characteristics of dairy. That is exactly what you fucking want in like an athlete, and particularly like a young athlete, which is what you were couching it in. You get a kid who's going through puberty and they're just pumping out testosterone. Testosterone's great, but without the IGF-1 to facilitate the action of growth hormone and testosterone, you're kind of pissing in the wind. Yeah. Like you're not really you're probably getting a fraction of the anabolic signaling that you could get if you were to tweak that dial of IGF-1, which is a little bit of the problem of really low ketogenic diets in this context, because you just tend to suppress IGF-1 and really enhance sex hormone binding globulin, which is a whole other fucking side story. But that was something that you were just very clinically like, here's a use case for why dairy would be really valuable. And Lauren, ironically, being this consummate scientist, couldn't check his own biases and understand that there was absolutely this use case where this would be really valuable. And I remember you asked him, you're like, well, what would you recommend for a post-workout meal for somebody banging weights and doing football? And he was like, salmon and strawberries.
Yeah. Oh boy!
How many fucking strawberries can you eat before you get 1,000 calories?
But I feel like sometimes people get so wed to an idea that there's nowhere for them to go, that they basically painted themselves into a corner. And I remember our good friend Matt Lalonde, who is now like a ghost in the world. But I remember Matt always kind of cautioned me, and he said, when you make a lot of these definitive statements, you paint yourself into a corner. And so, getting into, whether it be nutrition and training in this, he's like, it's always easy to couch things in terms of like, hey, this is what we've done. These are the results we've done. Is this the only way to do it? No. And then like kind of base it on principles. And so seeing these individuals like Lauren, where it was like, I'm going to die on this hill, like realizing that like, if you have to die on that hill, it doesn't allow you to take over any other hills. And that was extremely impactful for me early on. But, the amount of people that do better by eating, and you could call it a whole food diet. I mean, one ingredient. I mean, there's all these different things. I mean, the arguments now of like, the fruit is dramatically different than it was 40,000 years ago. A banana's not. I mean, it got so ridiculous. And I think I always go back to, I'm like, dude, if it's one ingredient, it usually fits within it. And, if you want to consume that, but then at the end of the day, you're an adult. I'm going to tell you what to eat. And if you don't want to eat it, don't eat it. And but then don't come to me later on and say, hey, I have all these problems. And I think another issue, we didn't understand the microbiome. I think we still don't understand the microbiome, but I know, we both know Dr. Speen Hazen, and her interesting observation was when she was in Africa. There were these, I don't know if she told you this, but there was like, they went to this game park and they had these huge elephants. And so the elephant took this like massive dump, and she went over and collected the stool. And when she collected it, it was full of ticks. Mm-hmm. And she was like, man, like there was ticks everywhere. There was ticks on the elephant. There was ticks in the dung. There was ticks on their helpers. I mean, it was everything. So then she ended up taking stool samples from all the guys that worked there, all the natives, all the locals. And she's thinking like, oh, I'm going to see, massive amounts. Lyme disease. And found none. And ended up finding something that was in there that basically was preventing them from having Lyme disease. And so she gets into it and she's like, so much when we think about the microbiome, it's not just what we eat, but it's the soil that we're in contact with, the animals, it's the environment. So to look at these ancestral diets and say, hey, you know what? The Hadzi eat, 600 grams of carbohydrate, super high carbohydrate diet, and they're around the equator. And you look at these other ones, I mean, all the diets were different. What do they have in common? They were basically eating within the confines of what was available to them. And they were living in nature. They're living in the dirt. I mean, when they're slaughtering an animal, they're slaughtering it, like it's not in a clean environment. They're slaughtering it in the dirt. They're cooking it right then. I mean, she's like, their level of cleanliness, the one that we've adopted is non-existent. And she's like, and that's why their microbiome is so strong and so powerful. And ours is so weak, that we don't necessarily live within nature the way that they do, which I thought was such an interesting observation where,
and I mean, she made the point that, people will get all wrapped around this is the ancestral diet and that's the ancestral diet. And it's like, well, okay, maybe, what's the thing that's going to make you individually function best?
Sure.
And again, there are maybe, if we're using the dart analogy, maybe there are some things that we can throw at the board and it might get you 75, 80% to the bullseye, but then you just got to tinker and iterate. And that shit may change too, based off of who you are and what you're up to. You get a good bout of, a gut bug. Like I figured out about a year ago that I had for close to 7 years Giardia, a roundworm, and Candida. The Candida being opportunistic because my guts were fucked up from the Giardia and the roundworm. It took me a year of different treatment protocols to get through all that stuff. And now on the backside of that, I can eat a little bit of carbs and I'm okay.
Wow.
Like I feel pretty good with it, and actually feel better than being straight up ketogenic, which the previous, 20 years, like I really had to stay in that area because both autoimmune and blood sugar stuff, like that's just kind of where I had to be. And I don't have remotely a good explanation for it. Like my gut definitely took another round of like insults doing the itraconazole and fluconazole and all these herbs to break up biofilms and everything. But at the end of that experience, I'm actually healthier than I've probably been in like 15, maybe 20 years. Like, I don't have any explanation for it. I other than something dramatically changed and I had to adjust what I'm doing to fit within that, and that's it. Like very empirical, very just outcome driven, very clinical.
Well, I mean, it could be environment. I mean, you guys, I think you guys were healthier when you moved to Montana. I know that Texas is a godforsaken place. It's fucking dusty. It's dirty. There's pollen and cedar stuff. I mean, like it hasn't rained here in a while. I mean, it is so dusty and the trees and this, and like, I have to start kind of doing work on the creek and I'm not even going to touch it yet just because it is, it is a hotbed
disaster.
Oh my God. And so, this, I know why Davy Crockett said, if I owned hell in Texas, I'd rent out Texas and live in hell. Because this place is, so, and I know you guys were sick when you were here. I mean, it definitely.
The girls were, oddly, I was pretty good.
Oh,
like
were you?
I think that's where I caught the Giardia in the Guadalupe swimming, which I'm never swimming in fresh water ever again in my life. And then I caught the roundworm at a farm to table dinner. There's a whole backstory to that, but
they got you on purpose.
They probably did. Yeah.
Let's get rid of this motherfucker.
The amount of sun I could get in Texas was great for me. So I was really good with that, but the girls were absolutely hamstrung with allergies. And it was like all that cedar and everything you're describing, they had such an allergenic load externally that then they were starting to react to all these foods too. And then when we moved, that allergenic load plummeted from the external environment. And then these things that the girls were having problems with largely went away. And so, yeah, your point about the environment is huge.
Yeah,
like
so
where you are and what other stressors. Yeah.
So one of the cool things, and I've talked about this on the podcast, was when Sabine was doing my microbiome stuff. We were kind of going through, and she was showing like different little pieces. And I had, she was showing me hers and was like, hey, here's a certain bacteria that's, native to like North Africa, where my family's from. And it's kind of how I can see kind of where your family or like at least where your lineage is. And so we go through a little bit farther. She goes to me and she's like, well, let's check yours. And mine was like the equal amount. And she's like, how do you have this? And then I was like, I don't know. My family's from this part of the world, not that part of the world. And then as we went a little bit farther, she pulled this up and she's like, why do you have 2 forms of bacteria from the Amazon? And I was like, the only thing I could think of is, Shanji and all the guys we roll with are from Manaus and the Amazon. And so she talked about gut health, and basically if your gut is extremely healthy, you're able to take on characteristics and absorb microbes from healthy individuals that actually are beneficial. And so she's like, there's just a chance that like, you're in close proximity and training with these guys and they have something. Cause obviously if you grow up in the Amazon, your exposure to, a million different things that, most people here in the US are not. And she's like, that's why they're so robust in their gut. And she's like, you come in close contact and because you're healthy, you're able to, take on these characteristics. So that kind of opened my mind a little bit, that it's not just the food, it's not just the environment, it's also the people that you're around. And she's like, if you find yourself around a bunch of depressed people, you'll be depressed. And I'm like, well, isn't that like a thing? She's like, it could be microbiome. And then we went through all these kind of different pieces. And she's like, we don't like, she's like, and this is where we went down the rabbit hole. She's like, the microbiome influences everything. She's like, it's the central nervous system. We talk about the brain, it's really the gut. And that's why, there's a connection between those two. But she's like, that feeling that you get in your stomach where they say you got to trust your gut. She's like, that's a real thing, because something in them is reacting to you. And like, we've used this as a, defense warning system for millennia. And she's like, it's only been in recent times. So, I mean, I always looked at it very one-dimensional. The gut is what we consume, what goes in our mouth. It's really our first touch point, but it's so much more dynamic than that, which has just made it so more, so interesting. But also to your to your point, with big corporations and big food and all these making super highly palatable foods, and we don't necessarily know what's in them. I mean, it's almost your only hedge against somebody maniacally creating something. I mean, now I was reading recently that they're working to design foods that will somehow counteract the GLP-1s and create this hyper palatable way to block it. I mean, because, these food companies are getting killed because these people are pumping themselves full of GLP-1s and they're not eating as much. So now all of a sudden the foods aren't getting consumed as much. So now they're trying to find foods that have characteristics that can counteract this. And I'm like, this is guerrilla warfare. I mean, people are, I think I saw that it was like 85 to 90% of all sickness and illness in this country is related to obesity. If you got rid of obesity, all of a sudden the healthcare, people crumble, because now all of a sudden they're not going to ask you to pay $3,000 a month in premiums.
Right. Yeah. It's fascinating. And you still have people push back that recommending good diet is a privilege and all that type of stuff. And I don't know what to say to that. Like, do you, people have different economic situations and whatnot. Do the poor really deserve shittier advice because they're poor? Like, that just seems like the most fucked up thing that you could possibly do. They should get the best advice, and we should figure out ways of trying to improve that situation. But it's ironic that it was such an admission. Like, they acknowledged that the engineering that had gone into the current crop of kind of hyperpalatable foods was super successful until the GLP-1s hit the scene. And the GLP-1s are just, to your point, gutting the sales of processed foods. Like, they've legitimately dropped significantly. And then these folks are like, okay, what do we need to do? What's the next arms race iteration so that we can bypass the GLP-1s, which is just madness.
Well, and then you also get the Lane Nortons of the world who are like, we're just basically, everybody's a lazy piece of shit. It's all calories in, calories out, you're not moving enough, and the only reason you're fat is because you're lazy. And I'm like, that's kind of hard. I mean, whether or not that's true or not, that's kind of a hard pill to swallow. I think that maybe it's more nuanced than that, and it's not as simple.
If we lived in a concentration camp and you had limited access to food and you couldn't just roll out of bed or off the couch and go raid your pantry, then like all of that applies. But when we have super easy access to a wide variety of hyperpalatable foods, it's just, in my second book, Wired to Eat, I made the analogy, and you were kind of alluding to this. You have to approach it almost like a self-defense strategy. It's like, if you don't want to get in fights, don't go to biker bars at like midnight. Yeah. I mean, and don't, if you don't want your wallet stolen, don't leave it on the dashboard of your car and stuff like that. Like, there's some planned things there. That's where my observation, and it's very difficult to do. There's not high success. People need to go in and gut their pantry and totally restock the house. And if you have kids, that's a process, and then eating out's a process. But like, you have to set things up in a way that is really simple and stack the deck in your favor. And it's hard to do. This is where people freak out over the GLP-1s. I don't know exactly where I am with them. My take on it is that we really do understand at a pretty high level the detrimental characteristics of obesity. Like we have that mapped. We fully understand it. I don't know that we fully understand the downsides of GLPs, but it's like if anything can roll back the obesity, maybe it's a net win. I don't know.
I am in agree with you.
Yeah.
I've said any way we can be less fat. I'll take this side with maybe a little side effect than just to be less fat. I have a funny anecdote for you. My freshman year of college, when I lived in Clark Kerr, which was this dorms in Berkeley, but they were kind of like big suites. So I lived with a football player, and our suite mate were these two tennis players. And one of the guys, Chris, was like razor thin. I mean, dude, that was like razor thin, figured he was a tennis player. And I remember the first time we all went over to the dining common, the DC, he like put everything on his plate, and this dude was crushing food and like eating almost like he was at a concentration camp. And I was like, hey man, like you can get seconds. And he's like, I know. Like he was super excited. So his sister, who went to Berkeley, came over, and she was razor thin. And I remember being like, oh man, these people are just like, she was skinny as a rail. And then probably about a week later, his dad shows up, and his dad was like razor thin, brought him some stuff. And I was like, oh man, these guys are just all like, like bean poles, to the point where like they were so skinny, you could see their knees, like the knee joints. And so I remember every time we would go eat, he was just like almost like, what's it called? Like where people like, get like real nervous, like start like with food. What is that? What's it called? Like for dudes do it with girls, like mate guarding, but it's for food where they're just like food insecure, I think is the term. Yeah. Like food insecure, like very nervous, like hand in front of it, like somebody was going to take it. And so I finally asked him, I'm like, what's the deal, dude? Like you're razor thin. And he's like, well, in my house when I grew up, my mom had a lock on the pantry and all the cupboards. And like after we ate, she like locked everything up, and we didn't have access to, like there was a lock on the refrigerator too.
Oh shit.
And I was like, oh, like why? And he's like, I don't know. That's just how it's always been. So like you had to eat what you ate at the meal, and there was no other chance because then she locked everything up. And then if you wanted something, you had to ask her, and she wasn't going to give it to you. So you could only eat at these meals. And he's like, this is the first time in my life that I've actually had access to unlimited food, and it's kind of overwhelming. So, and I was like, man, that's fucking crazy. So now I'm waiting for his mom to come over. I got to meet this lady. She rolls in easily 300 pounds.
Oh, wow.
So she walks in with the dad and the sister, who are like bean poles, and he's a bean pole, and she's massive. And all I could think of was Animal Farm. Like I was like, this is Animal Farm 100%. Like she's the one that controls the food, and she's the fat one in the family, because obviously she's not controlling it for herself. She's controlling it for these poor guys, and these people are bean poles. But and at that point I was like, he was a weird cat, mind you. But I was like, man, like this is really dysfunctional that like the mom locked everything up, and he's like, she had the keys, kept them on her all the time. And, obviously this was her way of controlling, but that was, but dude, like the look on my face is, I was like, oh my God, like this is Animal Farm. And, but just seeing how like kind of nervous he was with all this food, like eating and this, and I was like, dude, they like abusing, starving this poor guy and her, pussy ass husband, who I would have been like, first of all, get the fuck out. And I would have ripped that off and been like, we ain't doing this. But she obviously had bullied them into this. And it was a very, very interesting observation. But then realizing like when she rolled in at like easily 300 pounds, I'm like, oh man, like this is what you got to do. But yeah, I mean, the GLP-1s are fascinating. I had Doc Parsley on a few times to talk about them just because we get so many questions on them. And Doc's like, if there are side effects, there are, we really won't know like the long term, but he's like, like it's complaining of like, hey, this house is on fire, but if I shoot, the firefighter shoots foam on it, that's going to somehow be bad for the environment and hurt the soil. Okay. Right. Like that's a down chain effect. Like let's fix the house that's on fire was, I think, the analogy he gave. And he's like, that the house is on fire and everybody inside is dying. Like, let's just put the deal out and then deal with it. So I thought it was a pretty good analogy.
Yeah, for sure. And again, we won't know the super long-term consequences for years, maybe decades, but we're definitely running right up against the reality of what obesity does for us. So, yeah.
So to take a step back, we did a little bit of the prelim and understanding, you ended up kind of ceremoniously committing hara-kiri and leaving CrossFit behind, and then they pull you back in.
Yeah.
How did, like what was that second round? Like, how did that work?
So we've had some great people like you, like Greg Everett, land in our lives. Greg's just such a talented, smart guy, and we had put together this little publication, The Performance Menu. And ostensibly, originally, when we started tinkering with it, like we were in CrossFit, there was the CrossFit Journal. I would write pieces for the journal, and hardly any of them made the cut for Greg, like Glassman. And I knew they were good, and I knew they were really helpful. And so I asked him, I did the stupid thing of asking him, like, could we start a journal mainly focused on nutrition? He's like, yeah, go be, achieve, I'll promote it, all this. And again, I think in the moment he believes this stuff, and then he starts freaking out. He's like, oh, this is competition and whatnot. But we started the Performance Menu, and that was motoring along decently. It wasn't setting the world on fire, but it was doing pretty well. And we were just starting. So we had left CrossFit. We were no longer CrossFit NorCal. We were NorCal Strength and Conditioning. And our star was kind of on the rise. Like Men's Health had picked us as one of the top 30 gyms in America, and we were getting some bandwidth and everything. And that was happening. And then CrossFit was definitely growing. And at that point, Greg was continuing to be the main person doing all of the certification seminars, because he could talk on everything CrossFit, and he could answer questions from doctors and stuff like that. And at that point in time, I think I was kind of like the only other person in the world that could do what Greg did. Sure. Do it. If you had a doctor there, a PhD there, and they asked you a thorny question, you would be able to field it. So he reached out to me, and he's like, hey, I'm really sorry where things went. He didn't actually apologize. It was the classic narcissist thing where it looked like an apology, but it really wasn't an apology. And in retrospect, but why don't you come back in? We'll have you start running these other certifications so that they could run them 2 at a time. Greg would do one and I would do one, and they had a separate team. And that's where I met people like Pat Sherwood and folks like that. And so I started doing that. We did that for probably a year and a half. And we were actually up in Edmond, Canada, doing a gig for the third group up there. And Andy Stumpf was there, and this is when we went to the bar that invented like Harvey Wallbangers and a couple other drinks, and we had to be carried out of there. Like that was definitely an evening of excess. But Greg said, "Hey, Rob, why don't you do a nutrition seminar? Like that's your jam, and this could be our SME, our subject matter expert thing." I'm like, "Yeah, that sounds great." And so I started standing that up, and it went for a time, and like I did diligence around the way that I laid it out. I recommended a paleo type diet on the front and kind of made my case for that, and then used the zone to weigh and measure it to kind of optimize stuff. And I felt like it was both did honor to what he wanted. He wanted the zone addressed. I thought it was kind of a cumbersome thing. And I wrote a couple of articles, like there was this article, 42 Ways to Skin the Zone, which really didn't have 42 options. It's just an homage to the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. And I remember a guy writing in saying, there's not 42 options here. I'm like, read Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
That was why I ended up naming mine, 42 things I'd learned up to this point.
Yeah. So,
there's many layers to all this stuff, and I think that
there's always something, and this shit's so boring that you got to do. We have to do something to make it entertaining, at least to us, if no one else.
No,
and that way we get a chuckle. Was really popular. Like the nutrition seminar was really quite popular. I get 200 people at these gigs, and I feel like it was really helping folks a lot. And I think it was kind of dovetailing some stuff together. And around this time, also, this is when Nikki primarily figured out how to run a gym, because within CrossFit, it was like, franchises suck. You just need to go out there and go be achieve. And what this guaranteed is that everybody who entered the fray, they had no idea what they were doing. And this was great. And I don't know if Greg figured this out, if he just realized it at some point, but really poorly run gyms were great for that early CrossFit model, because you could get up to about 100, 120 people in the gym and barely keep the lights on. But you had to work a second job. It was never going to be your full-time gig. And your trainers would look around and they're like, wow, this guy's probably making like 10, 15 grand a month. He just needs 100 people. I know 100 people, so I'll go start my own gym. And they would start it a quarter mile down the road, and they would do exactly the same thing. They would, charge $75, $100 a month for unlimited classes and off to the races. And that really fed into this geometric growth of CrossFit.
Sure.
Nikki, early in this scene, she has an econ background. She did a regression analysis, and she showed that when you had even a super aggressive notion around retention, which was not in reality, but it was probably 2.5, 3 times better than what the reality was, that $100 a month, everyone, come through the front door, train as much you want. You had about an 18-month period before the gym was going to bankrupt and it would fail. And so we went to this thing, Mind Body Online. They had how to run business, but it was mainly for like yoga and Pilates. And so we were like the first CrossFit people to show up at this gig, and we got to have some sit down with these folks and describe what we did. And they recommended some personal training and a beginner's class. And this is where the on-ramp developed and whatnot. And so we developed all this stuff, and it just transformed everything. We had a profitable gym. Like, you're never going to get rich just running a gym, but you could at least keep the lights on, the bills paid, and feed yourself and pay your trainers decently. It's a lot of work, but if you really love that stuff, you could do it. And that was getting a lot of attention. And I think Greg was nervous about one thing, perhaps above all else, which was competition. That somebody would stick a flag in the ground, call it something different.
It was always that alternate brand.
Better.
He was always so paranoid of this alternate brand.
Yeah. He was super paranoid about the alternate brand. And so, which again is really weird, but this is all the stuff that was kind of percolating behind the scenes. I had been brought back in. We were running a pretty successful gym. There were some other people like Jeremy Teal and some other folks. He had the Sick Fit thing. There were some best practices that were out there, and this is kind of what led into the Black Box Summit. Some people got together, Michael Rutherford, myself, Greg, Everett, Jeremy Teal, and we just kind of put it out to the CrossFit community. Hey, here's some best practices. There's not going to be a one way to do things, but you're going to hear from some people that will let you look up our skirt and see what we're doing. And it's kind of funny. I knew we were on the edge because we're constantly, Glassman was just constantly doing these little zingers like marginalize me. And I it's hard to explain, but it's like I would be in, I would be out. He would, shit talk me at other events and stuff like that. He would really elevate Nicole Carroll, Nicole's a great person, but like she doesn't really know that much about nutrition. She got really jacked, she got lean, like that's great, but he tried to hold her up as this like kind of expert on nutrition. She just didn't have the chops to do it. Maybe she could have grown into it, but at that point that just wasn't really what she was about. But he was really just struggling to have like absolute control over everything. And what was fascinating about that is that the people who were go-getters were getting marginalized. And I think the way that he would marginalize people, if you weren't that talented, in particular, if you weren't that talented, you were immediately in his sphere, then it kept you in his good graces and it would keep you employed with him and whatnot. And then everybody else, it was just kind of like, well, he's marginalizing me, so I'm going to go do my own thing. And it just literally lit a fire under us to go do something else. But the Black Box Summit was like the sum of all fears, in that there was this group of people that were talking about some best practices. And I the folklore around what went down, like Greg Everett was talking about the med ball clean, and Dave Castro got all prickly about it. And there was this back and forth, and it nearly went to fisticuffs over all of this. And I was just done with it. I told Dave that they could take the high-paying job I had and stuff it. I don't want to be associated with people who operate like this. And Greg called me and he's like, "Are you really? We can walk this back." I'm like, "No, I'm done. Like, I can't do this. Like, you're just chasing us out. If you wanted us in, you would incorporate us in. We're not trying to do anything untoward other than like help people." Like, it was $1,000 to show up at this gig, and we capped it at 50 people, and it sold out in like 2 days. We had 50 gym owners that were just like struggling to do anything, show up at this thing. It was really front of mind for a lot of people that they wanted to do this. And there was all this other, backlash and drama, like for I don't know how long it was. At CrossFit HQ in San Diego, there were 3 photos up on the wall, one of Saddam Hussein, one of Osama bin Laden, and then in between them was a picture of me.
Yeah.
And which is so funny because Greg talked about things like Malcolm Gladwell and Blink and all this stuff, and that if you make something look kind of alternative and scary, it actually makes people curious about it. That was like the best advertising I could have ever had. Like there were all these people that came into CrossFit HQ, and there was this whole story about what a monster I was and how horrible I was. And then they would start poking around my website and listen to my podcast and like, this guy actually seems kind of reasonable. And I would have probably never got on their radar. He should have done the Stalin thing where he just erased me out of all the photos and I just disappeared and he never mentioned my name again. But that's not the narcissist's way. Just as a quick aside, like we knew that we were just riding this edge of getting kicked out, and we knew that Greg was just like freaked out that we were trying to do something to like upset the apple cart for him and create this alternate brand and everything. And so like this on-ramp that Nikki made was really good. Like it was a legit program. And we talked to OPT, James Fitzgerald, because he had his own business, how to run a business and certification, all this stuff. And he was on the outs with CrossFit as a consequence. But he was like, dude, you should stand that thing up and charge people for it and everything. And in my gut, I kind of thought that was true. But I really, the funny thing is I really wasn't trying to create an alternate brand to CrossFit. I was just trying to help CrossFit. So we gave that whole thing away for free, basically as kind of like a supplication thing of like, hey man, we're here supporting you. The week before the Black Box Summit, we actually helped CrossFit Legal to really take to task this gym in Chico, California that was offering CrossFit classes without being CrossFit certified. Like they were fully doing the trademark violation thing. And we did a bunch of footwork on the ground to help them solidify that thing literally the week before all this shit went down. And the one thing that I think is worth mentioning in this whole thing is post Black Box Summit, like I was blackballed, Greg Everett was blackballed, Michael Rutherford was blackballed. Jeremy Teal, who organized this event,
was not blackballed.
Was not blackballed, and he was in photos under Greg's wing in the subsequent weeks and months. He was literally the only person there who had aspirations about developing a CrossFit competitive brand, this SickFit thing, Strength and ChristFit. And when the group of people all arrived there, he's like, hey, we all see the writing on the wall. Like, we need to get together and develop an alternate CrossFit thing. So Greg was right that there was fomenting, dissent about that. The thing that he got wrong is out of like the dozen people that were there, only one of them actually had designs on doing this. And that was the one person that he threw his arm around and held up as an example of fealty or something like that, which it's just, I don't even know what to make of it. Like, it's just madness. It's completely crazy.
Damn. No, I was not there. I can't remember why I wasn't there, but I remember as it was going down, CrossFit HQ calling to ask me if I was there. And that was like, yeah, what they were doing is they were calling everybody to see like who was there, who wasn't there. And they were trying to get this idea of it. And I'm like, it just, I don't know. They, those are interesting days. And, and then, oddly enough, I don't know. I mean, I wonder what would have happened to CrossFit is when, Lauren obviously went over and, sold her shares to those Anthos Capital guys and they were going to come in. I wonder if those guys had actually made good, put him out to pasture, what this thing could have become.
It's hard to tell because VC sucks. Like and the Brian guy within Anthos, I really like him. Like, I like him as a person. I've had an ongoing relationship with him, but they just, anything that VC really touches
fucking just goes to shit.
Yeah. Like your thing about like Rich Froning, somebody who loved CrossFit, and had some business chops, or could be surrounded by people who had some business chops, that could be good. Like that could have been really good. Yeah, I don't know. Like, I don't think Anthos would have been a good fit at that time, for sure. Yeah.
Well, I mean, he stepped off. I mean, Greg stepped off, got a big payday, and now it's basically just riding it to the bottom right now. And I'm sure the guys at Summit, no, who was it? I forget who owns it. It's the guys from Berkshire. I think it's the guys from Berkshire.
It was Eric Rosa was kind of one of the
well, he was the front for it, but I think it's like for
Yeah.
Berkshire. But those guys are, in a situation where they paid $200 million for this thing, and who knows what the value is. I mean, I bet you it's probably closer to 60 now with as many affiliates as left. And, I mean, the one thing Greg did a great job of was, mobilizing the troops against, we're going over this hill to get this bad guy. It's all of us against all of them. And I think what happens when you become so kind of agnostic of anything, because Greg was great about picking out enemies. It's the NSCA, it's Big Sugar, it's this, where, all these people are against us and we're banding, people to fight them. And I think when they just came in and, kind of cleaned it all up and, we're just here to try to get people off the couch, I just think that it lost a lot of its power.
It lost the soul. Yeah. Greg wasn't wrong on that. He wasn't wrong about the NSCA. He wasn't wrong about the collusion between like Big Food, Big Sugar. Like this was when a bunch of this stuff, when the Obamacare thing first kind of rolled out, there was the exercise as science. I forget what it was called, but it was this provision that was going to go into Obamacare where the government would pay to get you a trainer and they could work you out a couple of days a week and all this stuff. But the trainer could absolutely say nothing about nutrition, and a provision within that was that up to six sugar sweetened beverages a day were fine within this context. And a bunch of this shit, not surprisingly, was underwritten by Coke and similar entities. And Greg railed against that, and rightfully so. And there was some research that was done that was shown to be completely fraudulent. And he spent a lot of money suing the NSCA, ACSM, and some of the associated entities, and showed that it was outright fraud, that they just like cooked the books on that stuff. And he won that stuff. And I think that it was borderline a crime that the folks that bought CrossFit basically memory hold all of that. They made all of that go away.
It's almost like they bought it for a reason.
Well, yeah, they did, but they didn't realize what the fuck they bought. They bought something that was prickly and counterculture, and they could have used that to have changed the world. And instead, they wanted to just slide CrossFit into the existing architecture of a broken system. And they were fucking morons on that. Like I again, like Eric Rosa, I think he's a nice guy, but I had numerous conversations with that guy, and I'm like, you guys are fucking this up. Like, here are these opportunities that like you do need to maintain some element of this counterculture thing, going and making nice with the NSCA, ACSM when they're in collusion with Big Food. You are just completely missing the whole picture here. But I don't know how most folks make money where they end up in VC. I get the sense that they're by and large not that creative, because the creativity goes out the window once you hit the VC thing. Like, there's this algorithmic thing where it's like, we're going to plug in here and 2x our money and get out and like rinse, lather, repeat. And there's actually no like creativity or mission behind any of that.
There's a certain arbitrage where, like, hey, if there's a dental office on one corner, there's a dental office across the other, we're going to buy them both, and then we're going to jack up the price and make them this. And then, this is where our people are going to have, and then we're going to parlay all these things to a bunch of these, and then we're going to package them up and sell them off. And and they just end up destroying the soul of anything. And they just ratchet the price up and ratchet the talent down by paying people less and driving people out. And I think taking money from venture capitalists is kind of similar to going in with vampires. And there's a lot of people that get to that point. I mean, Element was smart in terms of just crowdfunding. Going out and, taking, small kind of micro financing from a lot of different people that had a vested interest, and probably the smartest thing I've seen done. So it's opposed from having just one big VC firm comes in, and now all of a sudden they got 2 board seats in a board of 4, and they're able to make decisions when they probably shouldn't. So it's
right.
It's a shitty thing, man. It's sad to see, but it was funny. I was at Jared Allen's Hall of Fame, and I ran into Greg's builder, the guy that's building his house in Scottsdale. And the guy's like, "Oh my God, one of my favorite people. I never have to chase him on an invoice. He just pays for everything." And and I was like, "Well, what's he building?" And he explained it to me. It's like a $50 million house. That's this and this. He's just building this palatial estate, and he's got 10 kids, and they have a schoolhouse. I mean, he went through like this just amazing thing. And I was like, "Yeah," and he's like, "Oh, like just stars in his eyes." And I was like, "Oh, it's And what's amazing is Greg's trying to spin it all up with his, what is it, Metafix?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
And
the Broken Science Initiative and then Metafix.
Yeah. So he's trying to spin it back up when, he should probably just go out and raise those 10 kids and go take, pick up golf and do something else.
Right.
Sail off into the sunset.
It's interesting. He's definitely, and again, I think that a lot of what he's talking about is on point, but, and I think he's got a band of followers, and you will probably be smarter as a consequence of following that guy and listening to just picking up on his thought process and the way he goes through things. You'll be a smarter person as a consequence, without a doubt. But I think a lot of good humor points got burned. It's a different world. I think we were talking about this just briefly. Like, there's no way you could stand CrossFit up today, even as the way that things have shifted a little bit. I think that the broader like kind of social insanity isn't quite as bad as it was, but the kind of prickly counterculture element of CrossFit couldn't exist today. So like it had its right place, right time, really cool, sticky delivery system, early in the internet. You could never really replicate that again.
Yeah, like early in YouTube. I mean, I remember going to these CrossFit, because there was no centralized social media. So you effectively go to somebody's page, like NorCal, I think it was like NORCALSC.com, and you would go and you would read your blog or what was in there. So there was this kind of collections of blogs that you would go to. There was no Substacks, there was no Instagram. I mean, just the way that information was then, you physically had to go look at some terrible website that had a bunch of splash and red, and it looked like something was getting ripped, and you would read these black background with white words, and it just was awful. And the information was great because it was raw, and you would go to these gyms. We would drive around shitty neighborhoods, and we'd look for a tire and be like, "Oh, there it is," and we would go in, and there'd be just some grungy gym. And I don't think that, one, it would exist today, but also I just think that like the information was so pocketed that it forced people to go find it, where I feel now it's like you just open it and just get hit in the face, with a fire hose every single day.
Yeah, it's a fire hose now. Now the problem is people have so much information, they can't just figure out what basics are, what are fundamentals, and spend 90% of their time fiddling with that. Yeah.
I had this theory years ago that, and I actually wrote a paper on this, that what access to information is what kept people ignorant. That if you gave everybody equal access to information, everybody would be on a playing field. And like, you think about institutes of higher learning, like I went to Berkeley. So, there's a certain level of knowledge base that's happening at Berkeley that unless you have the ability to get there, whether it be paying or degrees or, test scores, whatever it is, that this information is effectively rat-holed in these higher levels of education, and that you physically have to go to them and show up and participate. And like, there's a high barrier to entrance to being able to like enter these, I guess you could say like institutes of learning, and like, take on this. Like there's a very proactive way to make it happen. So my theory was that like education and intelligence was like access to information was the deciding factor. And I laugh constantly, where now we have the entirety of the world in the palm of our hand, and people have never been dumber and never been more confused. And we run into this, at every single turn. And it's because people are being hit with so much information, and because everything looks so slick and so good, and people understand, marketing and social in here, you don't really know what's truth and what's not. And people have no ability to discern between it because they don't have the intellectual background to be able to like, it seems like bullshit. And they haven't necessarily done it. So then what they do is they attach themselves to experts, and then they go hard into that camp. And I gave a talk at Sorinex a couple of years ago on authenticity. And my contention is that the reason that things do not feel authentic is because most of what people say and do are not their own ideas. That, like, when you're young, you kind of hear something, oh, it sounds good. Let me try that on like a coat at the Goodwill. I'm going to wear it around, see how it is. And we see a lot of this with, like, in college with kids with like this, Marxist idea. All you have to do is read Karl Marx and know a little history and know what a piece of shit he was. And that he was never an economist. This was a terrible thing. And, nobody should go down this road. But for some reason, they're able to paint this in a romantic way, and people try this thing on, and they're kind of maybe 18 to 22, and they kind of understand themselves as the cultural Marxist, and this is good, power to the people, never really understanding what he wrote. And then they get out and get a job and realize these people are a bunch of assholes, and then they go into something else. And that's the hope. But the reason is when you're young, that's okay. But then it gets to a certain point where it just feels inauthentic because you've outgrown that, and you should have your own opinions and thoughts. And the reason being that you run into people and it does not feel authentic and you get that weird feeling like this feels like bullshit is because all they're doing is propagating somebody else's ideas and thoughts.
Right.
And what's happened so much on the internet is that everybody is just globbing on to whatever they think sounds best to be able to get them the most hits and the most information. And everything feels inauthentic because it's very few. I mean, you listen to somebody espouse something in this and be like, people have been ripping you off for years. And I'm like, oh yeah, that's Robb Wolf. Yeah, no, I listen to that podcast too. And yet they love to take this information. And something I've always been very conscious of doing is if I have an idea or I talk about something, I always reference where it came from. The idea that I stand on the shoulders of giants. I didn't invent this. This is where I got it. I'll tell you exactly where it comes from, because I think that creates authenticity. Like, here's what I learned. This is how I've used it. These are the outcomes. And then the other one too, for me, obviously I did 10 years in the NFL, and then I retired and taught hundreds of seminars around the globe, had the ability to be able to do this in real time, have a lot of ideas, have, people like you as a mentor, and be able to have a lot of, hey, like, what do you think about this? I'm going to try this. And you basically get to the end of this thing. You're like, we cracked this code. And then on occasion, I'll see people pull parts of our stuff out and kind of make it their own. And I'll look and I'll be like, oh yeah, no, I remember exactly the day that I came up with this, or I know where this came from, and it's just kind of an interesting piece. But I think the reason that the internet is so confusing is because inherently it feels so inauthentic, because all people are doing is just espousing other people's ideas over and over again with just a little bit of a slicker package.
Yeah, it's a great point. I mean, that when I can just catch a fragment of like a power athlete like post, I'm like, I know what it is. Like there's a gestalt to it, that you get, and there's this continuity to the look, the feel. So to some degree it's branding, but it's branding, but it's also this ethos that ties through the whole thing, and to some degree CrossFit had that at one time, it very much had Greg's DNA woven into all of it. And I think that is something that, it's a really great point. I haven't thought about it the way that you set it up there, but occasionally you see somebody, Rogan is pretty authentic. Like, he's very curious. He asks questions. He'll admit fault when, I was wrong about that. I didn't understand that. Or if you ask him a question, he's like, I've never heard this before, versus like on the moment trying to like make up some sort of bullshit and everything. And it resonates with people. I think Chris Williamson with Modern Wisdom, there's a few people out there that you get this legit authenticity where it's like they have their opinions and stuff, and they're oftentimes great at one of the things we've both noticed is the people who ask the best questions are usually like the best operators and the best movers in a space. They spend far more time asking questions than they do trying to tell you all the answers.
Sure. Well, the age old, like people just trying to prove how smart they are at all times. Kind of interesting. I was at the airport yesterday. I flew in from Tennessee, going out there and seeing Froning and them. And as I was walking through, I went back, I walked past Chris Williamson, like in the airport line. And I saw him, and but he had like his hat down and his sunglasses. So he was appearing to go incognito, but we were standing right there, and I was like, I'm not going to talk to this dude. But, I've listened to a bunch of his work, and he legitimately puts on a very, very good podcast and has interviewed people. I've
been able to hang out with him in IRL, and he's a great guy. You would love hanging out with him. Just lots of big big ideas and big questions, and really a cool cat, like a very cool dude. Yeah.
No, I think Andy Stumpf did his podcast, or maybe he did Andy's, but Andy was very complimentary of him, which is odd because Andy's not very complimentary of anybody.
He's not he wouldn't be complimentary of me, and I've known him like 15 years. So yeah.
So the fact that he was complimentary of him, I was like, really? Huh. I was like, Stump, I've never heard you say a nice word about anybody. This is blowing my mind. Yeah. So, but yeah, that piece of authenticity, and now all of a sudden we're in a situation with like the rise of AI. And I mean, it just feels like, I mean, I was watching something today that was like, they were basically taking these, commercials and this and basically putting in their own words. And it's just like dropping different people in and like creating such amazing stuff in this content. You're looking at it and you're like, I know this is AI, but it doesn't look like AI. Like this is legitimate stuff. So, I mean, you talk about authenticity. I mean, now I think people are going to get to the point where they believe nothing because it's the only way you can go for. Like you cannot, like you almost have to go back to, and I remember Greg told me this, Glassman, he said, my only advice is if you walk into every situation and everything and you assume it's bullshit and then work backwards, you'll be a lot better than believing everything and then trying to think that it's bullshit. He's like, so just don't believe anything. And my wife gets on me about that. She's like, why do you think everything's bullshit? I'm like, because it all is until it proves itself to be right. And, so I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but I think for this day of age where we're getting hit with so much information that's curated in such a way to drive us that you either have to do like you do, where you just unplug, or you just assume everything's bullshit and then work backwards.
Right. Well, and again, like, for like nutrition, human performance, even to some degree, like human happiness, there's some great fundamentals there, sleep, food, movement, community, sunlight. I think that we get more granular in understanding elements of that, but it's we're not just, there's not going to be a randomized control trial that shows that like social isolation is like this great thing for your mental health and your longevity and everything, it's just not going to happen.
But that's what people are doing. They're kind of self-selecting, social isolating, but yet they're living through this screen and they're avoiding deal where, I find that like there's a direct relationship between time engaged in social media and happiness for me. Like the more I get plugged in on it, whether or not it's for some other reason, who knows? Like why ever? Like, because there's days where I'm not plugged in on it. And there's other days I am. I definitely know I have a better sense of well-being when I'm not plugged in on it. I'm actually doing stuff. I wish that I had like a personal like little assistant that followed me around and did everything for it and did this, and I never had to see it. Because then, and even to the point where like I try not to doom scroll and I try not to go through it, but all of a sudden I'm like looking for something or I get kind of like into, whether it be like trucks or something that I'm into. And all of a sudden you find yourself stuck and you're like, I just wasted like 30 minutes.
Right.
Like, and I don't think that there was anything beneficial other than just being amused. And that to me is a scary, scary thing. Or, the fact that you have people that are just doing stuff just to be able to get clicks and to be able to engage the algorithm. It just, I don't know. But I also don't know how you put the genie back in the box outside of an EMP and basically going back to the Stone Age.
Right. Yeah, I don't know. It was close to a year ago that I took all social media off my phone at least. And so occasionally for Element, I'll get brought into like, we'll do a launch or something and I'll give it a little bit of a boost or one of our partners wants me to, interface with them or something like that. And so I'll download the app, get in there, do my thing, delete it immediately. And it's funny because so much of my life was, 20 years close of my life being online and talking to people and whatnot. And when I finally pulled the plug on that, it was really weird for a while. I was kind of like, oh, what am I doing? What am I up to? And it's like, oh, I'll start studying Italian and get back in and do advanced statistics course. And I started actually doing stuff instead of, being involved in all that. And the occasional times I have to put social back on my phone, I'm just like, oh God, like do I really have to do this? Because they make it super onerous to be able to do it from the desktop. Like you just don't get like the same UI, and it's not as easy and all that. Yeah.
Victor Hugo's getting married on Saturday, so we took him out to dinner for like just like like a bachelor party. Just took him out to dinner. We got him like a big like a Traeger grill, So we go out to dinner, and one of the Brazilian kids, Noah, who's really nice, but just not the sharpest knife in the drawer. Like big heart, just not the sharpest knife. And so as we're sitting there kind of making fun of him, which is one of our pastimes, Arash, who's one of the guys I train with, turns to me and he's like, "Does it bother you that Noah can speak English this well?" And I'm like, "No." I'm like, "Why, have you ever thought about it?" He goes, "I think about it all the time. One, he can speak Portuguese, but he also speaks English pretty well. And I don't speak Portuguese." So at the table, we were sitting there, we like basically made this bet that like we have 1 year to learn to speak Portuguese. So I hired a tutor and then I started on Sunday. Rush started 2 Sundays ago, and I have to go 2 days a week, and I have to basically get a tutor, and we have to be conversational enough in a year to prove that we're smarter than Noah. And if not, we're going to we have like a bet for this thing. And you know me, if there's a bet, I'm in on it. So like Arash is like, cause it was funny. We were sitting at the table, and it was like, I think Victor Philippe and his dad and like all the guys. And I think there was maybe a few white dudes, but like all of a sudden they're like talking, and then they switch into Portuguese and blah, blah, blah. And then they're all laughing. And then they try to like explain to you what they're laughing about, but that joke doesn't translate.
No.
And then they're like, they're cutting it up. And Arash is like, the fact that Noah speaks Portuguese and English really bothers me. And it was just kind of funny. So he like came in and we ended up finding like some pretty legit tutors. And so, yeah, that's going to be my Sunday and my Wednesday. And
one of the things I've been doing on that front is when I do my zone 2 cardio, I'll find shows that I like that you can get the language in Italian. Mm-hmm. And then I'll do, for the first like 3 or 4 months, I was doing, or you could do Portuguese, but I'll spoken word in Italian, subtitles in English, and now I've shifted to spoken word Italian subtitles, and like, God, what I watch, like the Terminal List and some of the things like that. I'm probably like 70%, like my comprehension of like being able to understand what's going on is probably, depending on the show, like 60, 70%. It's decent. I can at least get the gist of it. My spoken part is still way behind that, but Nikki was like, that'll come, and the people I've talked to, that'll come. AI is crazy. Like Grok, you just open it up and you start talking to it in Italian and Portuguese, or like, hey Grok, give me a 2-minute lesson or a 20-minute lesson using the verbs to be and to have in Portuguese. Go, and it'll just knock it right out. Has great pronunciation. And you ask it further to correct you if your pronunciation is off, or to highlight any words that you get wrong. But that is a thing. Like AI is going to like the tutor, I think, is great. But like if you've just got like 5 minutes here or there, Duolingo is not bad on that front. Like it has some great interface on it.
The problem I ran into with I did Duolingo, but it was I never felt like I get conversational. So one that I figured what I would do is obviously start with the tutor, but I started using ChatGPT and Grok, and hey, like hey, I'm a very basic speaker. I have like just like key phrases that'll like if I went to Brazil, I could probably get pretty far on like mais uma, which is like give me one more, and pão de queijo, like give me cheese bread. I mean, like like basic words that we effectively like mais baixo, which would be like get lower, all like the coaching words that we use. But the issue we run into too is because guys are from different parts of Brazil. Like, like where, Shanji's from Manaus, and, Victor's from, Fortaleza, and Philippe's from San Luis, and then this, and like, and then some of the guys are from the South, and, it's interesting to hear how
the dialect can be wildly different.
Yeah. And like the pronunciation.
It's like the South, like the deep South, like somebody, deep South versus like legit Boston, or like an old school Queens, New York, they sound like Bugs Bunny or something.
I used to run in this with the black dudes I played. The guys from Texas couldn't understand the guys from Florida, and vice versa. And like periodically they'd get into each other and they'd outbrother each other, or they'd have to stop and be like, wait, what the fuck are you talking about? And I'd be like, did they just outbrother each other? And like, it was all fucked up. So, but yeah, that's been one of the deals. But I figured we'll start with like a tutor and then obviously doing some micro learning. But I went in and kind of put a curriculum together. Like, hey, like what do I need to execute for my best chance to be able to speak this conversational 12 months? And it kind of laid it out. And I was like, all right, it needed like a combination of AI, but physical tutor, you need to be able to watch TV and like listen to podcasts. And like, it kind of gave me like a workload of how you need to be able to do it. So
have you pulled out what the top 100, 200, 500 words are in Portuguese?
No, but that's really good.
Oh yeah. Just ask for that. So it's like, this is some of the stuff, like there's just, the top 100 most used words in a language, and you know, flashcards and everything, you get the context around that. Usually the verbs to be, and typically in the Romance languages, the bastards have two forms of to be, and usually it's like a situational and a permanent, and so that complicates things just a little bit. But if you get those first 100 and then the next 100, and you build up to like a 500 word vocabulary, and then you get like the conjugation, you know, for me, for you, for them, for you, plural, for all of us. And then you're able to conjugate to be and to have for all of that stuff. Like you can fucking get a lot done, and you basically have like a 500 word thing, and you could probably do that in like 3 weeks, 4 weeks, and be pretty buttoned up on that. Yeah, right. Maybe a month.
I'm on it. Yeah, no, I got 12 weeks. But the other interesting thing is English is such a weird language because there's so much duality in meanings. You know, like two words mean the exact same thing within the context.
Right.
That it's really difficult for people that come here to be able to speak English. So the fact that like Noah speaks English, he doesn't get a lot of the jokes, but like it's funny that that was the moment and I'm like, Rush, how long have you been thinking about this? He's like, months. And I'm like, you just bring it up to me now? I'm like, dude, I love a challenge. But my Spanish was really good. In college, I dated a girl who was her dad was Mexican, and so she was there and doing a minor in Spanish, and so we spoke Spanish constantly, and my Spanish was incredible. And then we broke up, and now it's dwindled, and it takes me like a week or two if we're in Mexico, it all of a sudden starts coming back, and I think
starts ramping up.
Yeah, but even, like there's enough similarity between Portuguese and Spanish that like you can kind of like I hear them talking, I pick up like every other word, but there's also some different verbs and the way that they, you know, the pronunciation. Like I joke that Shanji speaks in I am a pentameter, you know, and so that part of the world. So it's kind of interesting. But yeah, this is the next challenge. And Arash is like, don't tell them. And then we'll go out to dinner. And when they start talking, we're just going to blurt in. And we're going to like
drop some stuff.
Well, have you ever seen that guy? He does it. He goes to like Chinese restaurants and he speaks Mandarin. And like they'll like kind of come over and like start talking with them, and then he'll just drop it, and the people will like lose their minds realizing he speaks everything. He's like, we could do that to them. I'm like, I'm in. Let's do it. We'll take a year. So, well, Robbie, that was great, dude. Awesome. I am sad that I don't get to do this with you more often. Every week would be not enough, and I'm sad that we don't get to hang out more because you still are one of my best friends, even though I don't get to see you as much. And I'm just stoked with all the success, and it's great to sit here and go down memory lane and have you on Power Athlete Radio again and again and again.
Thanks, man. Huge honor.
So thanks for tuning in to another episode of Power Athlete Radio. This episode of Power Athlete Radio is powered by Train Heroic, the most immersive strength training app experience on the market. We've built an online training business by partnering with Train Heroic to deliver all of our world-class training programs like Jack Street, Hammer, Field Strong, and Grindstone. To learn which Power Athlete training program best suits your goals, head to powerathletehq.com/training. And if you're a coach looking to build a business with the best training tech in the business, head to trainheroic.com/powerathletehq. And now back to the show. Hey there, Power Athlete Nation. Big shout out to all the heavy hitters who stuck around till the final whistle. If you've been soaking in the knowledge bombs and epic tales we've been dropping for free, here's your chance to be a game changer. Swing by klfi.com/powerathlete and toss a few bucks our way to keep the podcast fueled and firing on all cylinders. That's ko-fi.com/powerathlete. Your support makes a difference. See ya.